Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you all to the MedLoans Organizer and Calculator demo. My name is Jonathan Chancellor, and I'm joined today by Jay Youngclaws. We are members of the Office of Student Financial Services here at the AAMC. Today, what we want to do is give you an overview of how you can use our MLOC and how that can help you moving forward when it comes to choosing the right repayment plan for you as a medical school student. Before we get started in that content, Jay, would you mind giving us a little bit of history background about the MLOC?
Sure. Thank you, Jonathan. Pleasure to be here with you this morning and talking about the name is it doesn't roll off the tongue very easily. MedLoans, organizer, and calculator. It's a lot of words, but it's very precise because that's what it's doing. It's a free tool that the AAMC created quite a long time ago, over 10 years ago, to help medical students model the education debt that they have and what repayment would look like. As most of you listening to this know, the federal repayment plans often will link your monthly payment to your income. And when you are a medical student, you become a resident and then you become an attending physician. And as you move along that pathway, your salary and compensation will change quite a bit, in fact, between residency and post-residency. It's a very obvious point, but it really matters for these federal plans. So we wanted to create a tool where you can go in and put your own debt and see what your repayment looks like and personalize it to yourself, get a sense of what your monthly payments would be. There's some information in there about public service loan forgiveness, PSLF. We'll talk about that several times today. And the other detail about it is we designed it to seamlessly integrate the existing loans that you have. So I'm going to ask Jonathan here to talk a moment about NSLDS, but it's a way for you to get your own information. Jonathan, can you sort of basically explain, at a high level, how to do that?
Yeah, so a lot of you, whenever you're going to use your loan information, this calculator was developed to actually take a file that you get from the Department of Education. When you log into your account on studentaid.gov, what you do there is you can look at your view loan details or view aid details, and it gives you a file that you can download that would come directly from the National Student Loan Data System. And that file tells our calculator, this is the loan that you had when it dispersed. That gives all the details of the interest rates, the amounts of the loans, any interest that's accrued on the loan, and also what types of payment plans you're actually eligible to go into based on the type of that loan. So that's one of the things about this calculator that's so great. You download that file and you upload it. You don't have to go in and put in each individual loan one by one with all of those details. So that's where it's really going to be helpful for everybody.
Excellent. Thank you. And the last detail about it, it's free. And the account that you already have with the AAMC, if you are a medical student, will link to the calculator. You don't have to go through any extra hoops. If you're currently a medical student, you will automatically have access. And when you log in to the AAMC site, you will be able to access the calculator.
Very much. Now, that was an overview of the calculator. What we also want to do today is just remind everybody of the importance of what your repayment timeline is. And this calculator can help you step by step. There's a lot of things you're going to do over this first year as far as a graduating medical school student going into repayment. There's things you're going to want to be doing now, before graduation, at graduation. At every single step, this calculator can be a huge, huge benefit for you. So take advantage of it. As Jay just said, you all have access to it now. And I believe, Jay, how long do they have it for a while after graduation too, right?
Exactly. Many, many years after graduation. I think it's something like a 20 or 25-year time horizon, far
Yep.
more than you need, but long enough to cover everything you would need.
But it covers the statement you just made, which is payment plans can and do change. And that's one of the things that we're seeing this year. And this is another reason why we think hopefully the calculator, this video is going to help all of you because we are seeing a huge change in payment plans and what your options are going to be. As those changes happen, I could promise you, Jay and the team on the back end are working tirelessly to make sure the calculator represents those new plans. So what we're going to do is I want to show you on the first website, our financial information resources, services, and tools. This is a couple of the places where you're going to be able to find it on the landing page. You can go directly to the sign in that you'll see at the top right with those three blue boxes, which are our most commonly hit areas, searching first, the calculator, upcoming webinars and videos. But then you'll also see naturally we have the calculator as a standalone resource along with the other resources available at the AAMC First program. So those are two places you can get it. Of course, you can always reach out to anybody at the first team if you want to have any links or anything like that sent to you when it comes to the calculator. So what we're going to do now, without further ado, as they say, is I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to let Jay share his. And what he's going to do is he's going to show you how you basically get started so you can all see what the page, what the MLOC page looks like, and how you can basically get started setting up your MLOC account. So Jay, let me stop sharing my screen here.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think I'm sharing. Can you
I
confirm?
can see the first page, yes.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to give a brief overview, and then Jonathan and I are going to do some try to do a little bit of interactive Q&A to cover a lot of the common questions, so that I don't drone on about every little feature in here. But there are several things that typically come up when student borrowers are using the MedLoans organizer and calculator for the first time. It's such a mouthful to say. Often I will just say MLOC, the acronym for it. So here, as Jonathan pointed out, signing in to MLOC. We have a version for dental students and osteopathic medical students. If you're a DO student, this resource works the same for you. We've just developed it working with ACOM. So here you click to sign in, going to enter your sign in page, got my sign in stored, username and password from AAMC. We have our own two-factor authentication. So it's going to take me just a moment here. Totally exciting webinar usage here, but it's unavoidable sometimes when you have to plug it in. So let me authenticate, and here we go. Okay, so I'm a power user at the AMC, so I can use all different calculators. Most of you will not see this step. You'll just start right here. So the MedLoans organizer and calculator. Step number one is to get your loans in there in the organizer. So I'm going to click there, and you'll see here is the organizer. And Jonathan was mentioning earlier your NSLDS aid file. That's how we're going to get started here. I have no loans, but I have a sample file. I am not a current borrower with the federal student loan program. Many years ago, I was not a physician. I am not a physician, but I did have my own loans from graduate school, and I'm very familiar with repayment scenarios. So here, click upload aid data, and then you would go finding the file. So for me, I need to take one moment here and find my sample files. And I call them Dr. Median scenarios. So it's the median education debt. So what I'm going to show here in the upload is a medical student that graduates in 2026. So right now, for Jonathan and I, it's February 2026. We're imagining someone that's going to graduate in May and June of 2026. They borrowed through all 4 years of med school, and their total debt is $215,000. That's the median debt from last year's graduating class. So we're just trying to show a baseline scenario. Your own personal scenario is going to look far different. A couple of things that you don't need to spend too much time here in the organizer, but I just want to highlight a couple of things. You can, click here and drop down and see the different types of loans that you have. We're sorting here by year, but you can also look by loan type and show. It's going to show in this scenario 4 years of unsub loans and then 4 years of grad plus loans. We'll come back to grad plus. That's quite a hot button topic these days for a variety of reasons. But 2026 graduates will have mostly a mix of federal loans. The unsub is going to be a larger loan balance, and then the plus loan. And the really nice thing about reading the NSLDS file is it will get the accurate interest rate for these loans. So you can see here on the screen, the interest rates are a little different, but they're reflecting the loan rates that were applicable for those loans in that year. If you needed to edit, you could. It's very unlikely that you would need to do that from the NSLDS file. One thing that I should point out about these loans, you can see here on this Grad Plus loan, it's $10,000 balance. The way the MLOC works, it takes in the loan detail and then it actually calculates the monthly interest based on the monthly disbursements. And that is a very important detail because inside of NSLDS, sometimes you might go and see your balance. And if you had borrowed $10,000, you would be in NSLDS, and it might say something like your balance is 13,471. When you download the file and bring it in, you wouldn't see that 13,000 number. You would just see this 10,000 because the way the MLOC works, it's running its own calculation of the monthly interest based on the disbursement of this loan in the academic year. So just a small detail, a lot of work is being done behind the scenes because we're not trying to bore you with every little step or clutter up the screen with kind of extraneous details. At one point later on, you'll be able to see the balance that you owe, but starting here, you see these basic balances. And then you can, if you have a different loan that's beyond the federal loan and you want to be able to add that to the organizer, I'm just going to show this real quick. You click add loan, and then you would say the year that it's in. And then here you can see all the different loan types that you can put in. So, and we'll talk more about these later, but there could be a private loan, it could be an institutional loan, et cetera, et cetera. And then really straightforward. You would just enter it in. Every field with the red asterisk is the required fields, and then you would add it. And then that loan would be in your portfolio. I don't want to get bogged down, so I'm not adding it here. Next, we're going to jump over to the calculator. And this is where the medical student pathway really comes into play. So first step, of course, is how long is your residency? And again, I'm just going to do kind of a straight up baseline Dr. Median type scenario. So we'll do, say, a 4-year residency. The residency stipend data, when you are using this, if you're a graduating medical student, it's very likely you might know, if you're doing this post-match, what your residency stipend will be. The hospital might be able to share that information with you. If not, we have some of the AAMC data from our surveys. It's a little bit older here. We probably need to update this. In 2024, it was 65,000. I know if you try to project that going forward, I'm going to put in 69,000. That's sort of like a median estimate for a 2026 graduate. But again, you can personalize this for your own scenario. And then after residency, depending on what your pathway is, let's imagine I'm an emergency medicine doctor. So after my 4-year residency, you can go here, but you probably have a better resource. If you really are pursuing emergency medicine, you probably have a pretty good understanding of what the salaries will be. We put this data in here from a free resource publication. It's there, up to you how you want to use it and the values that you want to use. So the emergency medicine is showing at a low starting salary, 300,000. Again, that's maybe a little high, so I'm just going to be a little more conservative. I'll just say, imagine that it's 275. And then our graduation here, we are always obviously talking about a 2026 graduate. If I had tried to put that through, it would have failed because you can't have a graduation date before your last loan. So this portfolio has 2026 loans. I can't graduate in 2024. I'm a household size of 1. I have no dependents. Where do you file your taxes? This is important for one of the federal plans. There's only 3 options. Almost everyone's going to be contiguous US. And then how are you going to manage your loans during residency? You can either do forbearance. That means that interest would accrue, which might seem crazy, but could be a good scenario for some borrowers. But most often, people are going to select start repayment. These are some optional features I'll talk about later. You submit, and then first off, you'll see your summary information. And there is one little field I want to call attention to up here before diving into some of the other numbers. Monthly interest at repayment. This is really important to know and help you think about your loans during residency. So the calculator is telling you for $215,000 that you borrowed during med school, you'll owe each month, interest will accumulate a little over $1,400 every month. And then down here, we're going to see 4 plans, the repayment assistance plan, the IBR plan, the standard plan, and the new or the tiered standard plan. These are the plans that were introduced in the federal legislation that passed last July 4th of 2025. Really a fundamental change in student loans where Grad Plus went away and these 2 new plans were introduced. We're putting these new plans in here because these are the most common plans going forward. I need to spend one moment and talk about IBR and why that's still in the calculator. IBR is a repayment plan that is in a bit of a gray zone. It was created by an act of Congress, and the last act of Congress that I talked about on July 4th, 2025, that actually did not change the IBR plan. So the IBR plan is probably in an interesting kind of limbo state where it has not been altered and it is protected from having been protected is probably too strong. It's durable from having been created by an act of Congress, and it really will take an act of Congress to create that. So until the legislation from Congress says definitively this plan is ended, we're going to keep having it in the calculator because, as far as we can tell, all the other plans they specify, for example, they'll talk about the ICR plan or the pay-as-you-earn plan. They specify those plans will be sunset and replaced with the RIP plan. The IBR plan, it's a little more unclear. So we're just leaving it in the calculator for now. That was far more information. I didn't want to get too bogged down, but I just want to explain why is it still in here. And it actually matters, and we'll talk about this for PSLF scenarios. So here's your 4 plans. We're highlighting here, very self-explanatory. How long does it take to repay? What's your monthly payment during and after residency? The IBR plan has a monthly payment cap, so that's shown here. What does the total repayment look like? So if you did the RIP plan for this scenario, you would repay your loans in 15 years. You would repay a little over $400,000. And then this column here covers PSLF, both what is paid and what would be potentially forgiven. So here you can see the RIP plan would result in $150,000 forgiveness after 10 years. So again, to do that, you would do your 4-year residency, and then you would have to do your 6 years post-residency in emergency medicine in a nonprofit employer environment. And again, I think we're almost done. One more thing I will show. This is, again, kind of a summary repeating, but it is useful to see the view details if you're really curious. The way the calculator is working behind the scenes, it's dealing with each one of your loans at the monthly level. So it runs through complex calculations where it's looking at the monthly interest, the monthly payment, figuring out the balance on that loan, then it moves to the next loan. So here we're just showing you all the loans when they add up together, what is the total monthly payment and what's the monthly payment during and after residency. The first number in each of these cases is your first year. The last number is usually the last year. I say usually because there can be little quirks of that calculator, but very often it's displaying to you what your payment would look like in this case in the 4th year of residency. So your first year, you would start about $345 a month. By your 4th year, when your salary increases, you would be at $540 a month. And I say when your salary increases because that is a detail that the MLOC is dealing with behind the scenes. It is growing your residency stipend based on historical rates so that each year your income during residency would increase. And it's doing the same thing for the post-residency scenario. So I started with this is helpful because I can remember, $275. So we had a $275 salary 4 years in year, the next year after the $275, it will grow at, around 3% or so. It's got an inflation kind of piece in there. And so it will grow. And what we're going to see then at the end of the full time frame, which again was 15 years, is that in year 15, if you stayed in this RIP plan this whole time, you would be paying about $3,000 a month, no matter, or depending on what your salary is exactly. This is modeling some kind of salary that's probably in the low 300s because we're 15 years in and 11 of those years have been growing from the 275, if that made sense. And your income then would generate an RAP monthly payment of a little over $3,000 a month. And you would have paid this much, and this much would have been in interest. I did want to pause on one thing about review details. This is really in the weeds, but it's helpful if you're one of the kinds of people that really wants to dig into the numbers and look at your own scenarios. This balance after residency here in the middle of the view details, that's telling you what it says. So in this case, we borrowed $215. You'll remember we had a monthly payment of around $1,400 a month and in residency. And no, we had, monthly interest of around $1,400 a month in residency, and we're making only a $345 payment. So that's about $1,100 of interest that would be accumulating. But a very nice feature of the RIP plan, there's a subsidy on the unpaid interest. So actually, we're going to show you right now the difference between IBR and RAP. It's a pretty big difference on this exact number, your balance after residency. So here with their interest subsidy, our balance after residency is $248. And remember, we started with $215, so there was interest during med school, interest during the grace period, but no interest during residency. So watch what happens when I switch to the IBR plan. $291. There is no interest subsidy. IBR has a monthly payment very comparable to RAP. during residency. It will have a lower payment after residency. You can look and see that here. The monthly payment, it's smaller, and even in this case, in year 20, it's smaller. So this is a way for you to see kind of like how much interest is accumulating, what's the difference between IBR and RAP. Now, the reason IBR is in here, now I'm going to really focus on something in the weeds, but it really matters for PSLF. So I will say a statement here, kind of buried in the middle of our our recording, our webinar for future use. If you, as a borrower, physician borrower, are going to do PSLF and you have no hesitation, you have the pathway all mapped out, you are not interested in flexibility, you know for certain you're going to do PSLF. That's when the IBR plan might be something worth considering for your own situation. It's a detail you should definitely discuss with your financial aid office. But the reason I'm mentioning it so much here is that the IBR plan has a payment cap. So here it's almost $2,900 a month. And because that caps your payment, you're going to pay less over the 10-year time frame. So you can see here in the IBR, you'd pay $192, whereas RAP, you would have paid $213. It's not a huge difference over a 10-year time frame, but it's not nothing. So, it's around $20,000, and you can see the forgiveness is quite a bit different because the interest had been accumulating. The PSLF is resulting in more forgiveness after the 10 years, but really because of the cap, you pay less in IBR. Again, it's a very special scenario. You have to have no hesitation. And when we talk to medical students, and Jonathan, I'm sure, is going to corroborate this, but nobody likes the idea of like, well, wait a minute, if I follow that pathway, I'm not going to have any flexibility. What happens if my plan changes? What happens in year 7 if, I have a life change or a different pathway and I wind up not pursuing public service for 10 consecutive years? That's totally fine. That's the way life works, and you should follow that pathway. But what I just said is probably not as relevant to you, and you really would want to focus in on RAP. So that was a kind of a deep dive on these two plans because we're at that point in the calculator where it makes sense. But now I'm going to kind of stop and pull back, and we'll talk more about general details of MLOC. So, Jonathan, what did I miss?
Not a lot there, Jay. That was a really good breakdown of what the
Thank you.
calculator is. What I thought we would do next is really start to think about, Jay had like what a lot of things that I do on my end is I do a lot of talks with medical school students across the country, and we really do get a lot of questions about different scenarios because I know Jay will also agree there is no one size fits all. This calculator. What's so great about it, and I always tell everybody my favorite thing about it is the fact that you put in your information, it's going to tell you what's best for you. That does not mean it's going to be best for your classmates going into the same specialty, or even if you have a classmate that's going through what it sounds like is exactly the same thing. I can guarantee you there's going to be little details that's going to change these payment plans for you. So that's what we want to do. Before we get into some of these questions, Jay, what I did want to sort of bring up to everybody is there's a lot of details about these payment plans. You're not going to necessarily find the details about the plans in the calculator. If you want to know more about these plans, you could utilize the first website. We have repayment compared charts where you could look at RAP next to pay, IBR, ICR. Now, typically when those are created, Jay does those too, but they're there for you. They're PDFs you can download. Same thing with other resources we have where if a lot of you want to know, like, why does RAP seem like it is better? Jay mentioned a subsidy. He mentioned a cap on the IBR. We have those all broken down for you on other resources at the first program, just to let you know that. The calculator definitely shows you the numbers, which is great. But if you want to learn a little bit more about the plans in depth, you can absolutely take advantage of those. And we can approach that here in a little bit when I show you some AAMC resources. What I thought we would do, one of the number one questions we always get asked, Jay, and you did already touch on this, was PSLF. You had talked about how somebody saying, I want to go into public service loan forgiveness. Do I know which plan is best for me? And it does show the numbers there, right? It does show that. What about that amount that is forgiven? Do borrowers have to be concerned about that? Are they responsible for that? Because the calculator shows you that's a big difference here in IBR and RAP, right? Like the number that's paid, you mentioned the 213 and the 192. That's not a big difference over the period of 10 years, but that forgiven amount's a pretty good chunk of change. What do borrowers need to know about that forgiven amount?
I'm going to test something on the fly and hope it really works. Yes, it really works. So I went to the help menu and it has what I'm going to say out loud, which is one really nice detail about PSLF. PSLF was created at the same time as the IBR plan quite a long time ago, somewhere around 2013, 2014. And they made in the legislation the rule that PSLF forgiven amounts are not taxable. So Jonathan is highlighting, hey, 153, 226, what does that do for my taxes? Nothing for your taxes. There really is no concern. And it was mentioned right here under this little help text currently, forgiveness amounts are not taxable. And that has been a durable feature of this plan since it was created. So nice detail to keep in mind about PSLF.
Yeah. 100%. And it does just lay it right there for you what PSLF looks like. But Jay did make a good mention too, the fact that, that is a 10-year commitment, right? So these are numbers that suggest if you stay in that plan for 10 years, this is what it looks like. We all know things are going to change. That's for sure. Another question we get asked a lot, Jay, and let's see if you could show us what the calculator can do for this group of students. What if I'm married? What does that do for my student loan payment? So how can you show what the calculator will do for those students who are either married now or they're thinking about getting married here in the next little bit?
Okay, thank you. So we go back to the organizer, and here I'm going to have a little laugh because it's a little bit comical, really. You can change your marital status with a click of a button inside the calculator because that's the way we programmed it. Right now, I'm single, and you have two options, married to a physician or married to a non-physician. I'm going to do non-physician because it's a little bit quicker to do that first. So in this case, I've just changed it, and you can see right here, now we're married to a non-physician. And the reason that's relevant is those income-driven plans, the income matters. So I'm going to go back to the calculator, and what you're going to see here is, oh, now we have a new field. Because we've selected non-physician, we need to know what is our spouse's salary. I have no clue. So I'm just going to enter, a very straightforward baseline number, $50,000. And then let's imagine that not only are they married, but maybe they have a child. So in this case now, our household size would be three people, the two married physicians, and then their child, and then that child is a dependent. So we're going to add in one dependent. So all I've done here, changed the status in the organizer, put in the salary, made sure the household size aligns with the personalized scenario. And this is where Jonathan's point about your details aren't going to look the same as your classmates, even if you're both pursuing the same residency pathway or same specialty, because all of these details can be different. Human beings are complicated, scenarios are complicated. So now, again, we're seeing the results for the married to a non-physician. And you can see, I won't dive too much deeply into the numbers, but you can see how that different income and different marital status and household size really does change your payments both during and after residency and changes the PSLF pathway. On the PSLF point, again, in general, PSLF for IBR is going to result in a lower amount paid, in particular because of this monthly payment cap. So this is just the straightforward where you would kind of change that. And then let's add in the more complicated scenario, complicated only because of the numbers not passing any value judgments in any way, married to a physician. It becomes much more complicated because then both of you are going to have the residency path. And this is where the calculator really can show its power, but also it takes a little more time to to work your way through the results and make sure the details are working the way that you hope that they do. So here, to really model married to a physician, I'm going to make it a bit more complicated, and I'm going to add a loan for the spouse. In this case, I'm doing just one loan to show you that each person in the relationship can have a loan, and we'll see how it changes the numbers. So here we have 2026, a $50,000 unsub loan for the spouse. So now our total balance is 265 based on the debt of the two people. And the reason we're doing everything in the household is because this is the way the federal programs work. It treats married as a household. And so it treats the household income and the household debt and kind of works through the examples. That's the way it's supposed to work. Real life can be more complicated, but let's move over to where we would input the values for married to a physician. So maybe here your spouse is pursuing a primary care option, And so their pathway is going to look a little bit different. This is remembering what I had for a spouse salary. That's where the 50,000 comes in, because that's what we had before. We'll just make that one 250. And in this case, we can have different graduation dates, but that gets even more complicated. So we're just going to give them the same graduation date. You've married your classmate, and let's say in this case, we're not going to have a child. It's just the two of you. So a two-person household, a 3-year residency and a 4-year residency. And that's really one of the powerful features of the MLOC, where these two residency scenarios are now not perfectly aligned. One person is going to end residency sooner than the other. And so let's take a look at what that shows inside of MLOC. So the way that we've constructed this is to count residency as the start of the first and the end of the second. So whatever the maximum residency length is. So here, the residency is a 4-year number range, because the one person had a 4-year right up here. One person had 4-year residency, and then post-residency begins after that 4th year. And that's really relevant because this number here, this 2806, that's a big number relative to some of the numbers we've seen before. The reason that's happening is after year 3, it's saying, oh, okay, one person is in year 4, taking this residency stipend and growing it a little bit, but then the other person is now the attending physician, and their salary is 250. So we have 250, and probably somewhere in the 70 to 80,000 range is the income. Again, that doesn't matter. It's doing all of that behind the scenes. What really matters for you as the borrower is to say, like, oh, okay, actually, what's the payment range? So it's going to show you it right here, and you can kind of see the scenarios. The couple of details that strike me on this one, I've never run this scenario, so I'm sort of trying to react to the numbers on the fly, but I'm seeing, PSLF because of the dual incomes and the fact that only one of the physicians had $50,000, which is much less than the median of 215. The resources of that household allow the loans to be paid off in 10 years, or perhaps slightly less than 10 years. So actually, PSLF is not relevant in this scenario. It's going to be very different numbers if you go back and you load 2 people with 215,000. But again, you get the gist of it here. This is personalized for your own scenario. It's going to show you the details. And if you really kind of want to dive in to the sort of what are my details and what are my spouse's details, you can go in and see the view details. So it shows you your loans assigned to you as the borrower, and then the loans assigned to your spouse. And you can kind of walk through all the details and see the balance after residency, all the kinds of stuff we talked about before. That was a ton of time on married, because the married scenarios are relevant and complicated.
We get asked a lot of questions about them, Jay. So that's why it's good that we wanted to demo that and show that. I know a lot of students will ask, we're doing couples matching, and that's just a big question that comes up with everybody. Like I said, the rules for these plans, that's where we have to just remind everybody, these are income-driven plans, right? That's the wrap in the IBR. So obviously, if something changes in your household, that's going to change the payment plan for sure. I think one of the last things that we would probably want to look at, Jay, if you can help us with, is for those borrowers who are graduating, not everybody had federal loans. And we showed how simple it is to download these federal loans in that file. But, once you graduate medical school, you're no longer in school, right? You've gone through undergrad, you might have done a pre-med, a grad, a med school, but once you graduate medical school, all loans you have are going to be due at some point soon. And that's not to scare you, that's just to remind you. And that's why we also reminded everybody at the beginning, there's a timeline of things where you're gathering your loan portfolio. So we will run into some people who say, look, I had a different loan that wasn't federal. So Jay, can you maybe show us how the calculator can help those people who didn't have federal loans that wouldn't have been contained in that data file?
Of course. Thank you, Jonathan. It takes a little bit more work in the organizer, but we can accommodate those scenarios. So here I've gone back to being single, and I've eliminated the spouse loan because now we're single, and we're back to the median borrowed amount of 215. So let's imagine that the 4th year for this student was a little more expensive than they expected, and their school has an institutional loan that they wanted to take advantage of. So I'm going to add the loan. I'm going to put it in the 4th year, and I'm going to say, okay, this is an institutional loan. And you can have 2 different types. Subsidized, that means the interest is covered, or unsubsidized. So let's imagine, I'm not quite sure which way to go. So I'll just say, let's imagine you have a generous policy from your institution. We could put this loan in as a subsidized loan. In that case, behind the scenes, no interest is going to be accumulating during the time period that you're in school as well as your grace period. I want to, before I proceed further, highlight that not everybody is at an institution that has institutional loans. And so maybe you have a different type of loan. We just have a generic kind of category here, other/private loan, that's more closely going to model if you have, say, a private student loan. And then a couple of the other options here. Again, we don't have to spend too much time on these, but consolidation loans, those can be of interest and popular for people. The trick with a consolidation loan is if you're really going to pursue that inside the calculator, you'd want to back out the loans that were consolidated. For example, if you load your portfolio in and then you say, well, 6 months from now, I'm actually going to consolidate. I don't want to get too bogged down into that, but you would have to create the consolidation loan of the 215,000 plus, and then remove the other loans so that you don't have both in there and have a $430,000 portfolio. So let's go back and say institutional subsidized loan. Let's say that you borrowed $11,000 in the fourth year. Let's imagine the school has a favorable interest rate and whatever their repayment term is. This is a detail that's very important on the private loans. And it's so important, I'm going to put a bit of an unusual number in here so that we can track that result. So I'm just going to put 11 years in here and we'll kind of hold that thought. It has a subsidy in school, but not during residency. Again, these details are very important on private loans, so we have to fill them in. So I'm going to call it the INST loan, and we would add that. Okay, so now we have 226 because in this fourth year, we have that $11,000 institutional loan with 11 years repayment. We're going to go back to the calculator. We can keep all these scenarios the same, except for want to make our household size 1 because we're single. This is probably a useful moment to emphasize household size and dependence. They're not linked in the calculator because they're not necessarily linked in real life. So you have to make sure you're updating both. And the reason that we have these in here is the RAP plan, it factors in your dependents, but the IBR plan, it factors in your household size because it's using something called the federal poverty guidelines. So each plan tracks on a different variable. So we have to put both of them in here. You should make sure they align. So let me submit that. And then what we'll see here in the output, again, I don't want to spend all the time because I've covered a lot of these, but I just want to show in the view details, what you'll see is, oh, okay, this loan is in here and it's being paid at the same time as the RAP plan on the federal loans. So in this case, because this plan, this loan has an 11-year term and the repayment plan is fixed, we're making $109 a month payment on top of the federal loan. And this gets at what Jonathan was saying. If you have both types of loans, you're going to have a bigger payment during residency because your federal loans will often have the income-driven repayment. And then the private loans, they don't really have income-driven plans. They have more fixed plans. And so that fixed payment would be on top. And that's why here we're going to see, oh, now our payment is no longer in the threes. It's in the $453 a month. So what it's doing kind of behind the scenes, it's tracking both loans and making the payments along the way. And as soon as the 11 months goes by, it drops that out of the calculations and continues paying on the federal loan. One small quick thing I want to bring up before we hit the next question is, I haven't talked too much about this new standard plan, but I want to emphasize this one is dynamic. So this new tiered standard plan, the number of years of repayment that you have is dependent on the total amount that you owe. And the rule of thumb for med students is you're probably going to be at 25 years because the balance that triggers a 25-year repayment is $100,000. And most med students have more than $100,000. So it's called new standard here, but you're often going to see a 25-year repayment plan. And the standard plan is usually a 10-year plan. In this case, it's an 11-year plan because remember, we had that institutional loan in there that we gave as an 11-year repayment. So I just want to highlight that that is taking precedent because the calculation behind the scenes is paying off the federal loans in 10 years and then using that 11th year to pay off the institutional loan. And so when you have the side-by-side scenarios, the way these fixed plans work, again, not spending too much time, the 25-year plan, this one is like a mortgage. You have a lower monthly payment, but you're going to pay a lot of interest in the long run because it was 25 years. And you can see that right here, 538, much higher total repayment amount because you took longer to repay. Whereas a much bigger monthly payment, you're going to pay your loans off quicker, going to be less interest in the long run. Okay, hopefully that covers those cases.
It very much does. It very much does, Jay. Thank you so much. Let's tackle one more question if you don't mind doing that with us today.
Sure.
We do get a lot of questions from students, even residents, of course, who are just saying, look, I know that I don't have, like, there's a certain amount of debt that I have, and I just want to be aggressive with it. I don't want to do PSLF. I know I'm going to be in a private practice or I'm not going to be eligible. But what I would like to do is I would like to make an additional payment on my loans. In other words, I just want to be done with this as fast as I possibly can. So let's say somebody comes to the calculator and they have an amount of, I'll let you come up with that amount, Jay, of what they want to do to apply to their loans in addition to that minimum monthly payment. Can you show us how the calculator will show them what impact that has on their payment plan?
I sure can. It's almost like we planned this presentation, Jonathan, because here we are at the optional features that I glossed over earlier. There's two optional features here. We won't get too much into this one, but let me say briefly, this one will tell you what's happening. It's modeled on the idea that for the federal plans, you want to use your income-driven plan based on your tax return. And as a fourth-year medical student, you will not have earned income, most likely, and you'll have a $0 tax return. If that scenario applies to you, you can use MLOC, and this is just a simple yes, no. I've kept it as no. Again, I don't want to dive too much into that because that's a lot about repayment. And today we're focused mostly on the MLOC. But Jonathan's scenario does come up in the real world. Students will say, I want to be aggressive post residency. I'm going to have some resources. I want to really focus it on the debt. So in this case, we talked about 4-year residency. I believe we were talking about emergency med 275 as our income. Let's say we're going to make $7,000 a month payment. Very aggressive because we want to pay off our loans as quickly as possible. So what happens if after residency we make an extra $7,000 a month? Again, this tells you a little bit more about the field, but let's submit that and see what happens. You see several things happening. Our repayment now in this column is much smaller numbers than we've seen before. And I mean, the realism of the statement is we were making a huge monthly payment. In this case, the federal plan plus the extra 7,000, we're making over $9,000 a month on your loans. That's going to make a massive dent in your loans really, really, really quickly. And so you'll pay everything off in 6 years. So basically 2 years after the residency, you'll have paid everything off and you'll have paid 291. I'm highlighting RAP here because in this kind of scenario, you're not thinking about PSLF. We really don't have to pay attention to IBR. The RAP plan, it gives you that subsidy that we talked about. Maybe you're questioning my aggressiveness and you want to be more conservative and the life is complicated after residency. Let's scale this back. Still have an extra, but only an extra $1,000. And we can submit it, see what that looks like. And this is a nice feature about MLOC. You can just toggle back and forth and check a couple of different scenarios. So in this case, it's going to take a bit longer. So we're looking at 7 years after residency, but again, pretty aggressive repayment, moving our payment from, previously was over 2,000 a month. Now we're over 3,000 a month. And again, total repayment of 350. So again, something to play around with if you are trying to imagine these kinds of scenarios.
That's great, Jay. Thank you so much for that too. Yeah, it does a really good job of that. I myself also not a physician, but when I started in this role, I still had student loan debts, and I definitely used MLOC, just because you can go in and play around with those numbers and just see what's going to be best for you. And as Jay mentioned, things are going to change. That discretionary income every month is going to change from month to month, year to year, with changes in household and things like that. So thank you for that, Jay. I think that's going to be good for all the main questions that we get asked. I'm going to steal back my screen here from you,
Please
just
do.
to finish up everything here. We get asked all sorts of questions, and every time we do a session, every time we meet with students and residents, financial aid administrators, just about what things they're wanting to do. But as Jay just said, one of the great things about MLOC, you can swap things around. You could see what scenarios work. when things are going to change up with you. So just to let all of you know, I mentioned a moment ago about those additional resources because there are a lot of details about the student loan payment plans you might want to look at. You can absolutely do that through any of these resources, starting with our guide to money management. Our fact sheets are going to have all sorts of different information breaking down those payment plans, knowing more about loans, preparing for residency. And I did mention that repayment plans compared chart. That is a great tool for all of you to see these plans side by side. It'll show you what they want as far as a percentage of your income every month. If they're all eligible for PSLF, it talks a little bit more about that subsidy that the RAP plan has. Jay's mentioned a number of times. So please go out, take advantage of the first program and utilize all of those different resources. I think MLOC is always going to be our number one. It's hard to argue that, but there's definitely plenty of other resources you have available for you. This is our email address. So just make sure if you have any questions, if you're running your own numbers through the MedLoans Organizer and Calculator, if there's any questions you have for us, please feel free to shoot those our way. Jay knows if there's questions about MLOC, we're going to forward them to him. So he's ready for that. He gladly takes those on. So that's going to do it today. Jay, did you have any final messages, any final notes that you want to tell everybody?
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan. I always appreciate the opportunity to work with you on these kinds of things. And for those of people listening or viewing that have made it this far, we talked really detailed about the numbers and the calculators. But on the big picture, just want to say, this is a resource to help you get comfortable with thinking about managing your education debt. We don't want it to be intimidating. We want you to feel empowered and confident that you're going to be able to address this. It's daunting when you graduate and you think about, well, I owe $219,000. And hopefully what the calculator is showing is post-residency, you're going to have the resources to address your debt. And I know that comes up, Jonathan, when you talk with students a lot, but I just want to, emphasize that here, that this is a tool to help you feel more comfortable and not demoralized.
Very much well said, Jay. Very much appreciated. Thank you so much for taking your time today to go through the calculator with all of us. Again, if anybody has any questions for anybody of us, any of our team at the AMC or Jay, just please let us know.